All right. Well, it's December. I know this is the 2020 calendar. It's also like a German calendar or something, but it's December, which means snow on the ground. And it means Christmas time, and it means all of the traditions start up. Our family, I've mentioned this, I think, before, but our family have two different ideas of when the Christmas tree should go up, and I know there are a lot of different ideas about that. One of my idea is not until Christmas, or not Christmas, not until December 1st. December 1st is like the start date for me. Robin is like the day after Halloween, she would. And our compromise is like, okay, not before Abby's birthday, which is November 24th. Now, the tree went up a day before Abby's birthday, but I'll still take that as a win. She did a good job holding off. But we really enjoy our Christmas traditions. For my family, my extended family when I was a kid, getting together with the whole family, eating a big meal, that's definitely one of the traditions. Putting up lights for some of you on your houses is a big thing. And of course, one of the biggest things is we tune into different radio stations, some of us. And that is definitely true in my family. As soon as December 2nd or 3rd rolls around, the Christmas music starts on the radio, and you can tell where our dial is on our radio because that's what we listen to basically for 2 months, right up until Boxing Day when all the Christmas music goes away. So you're just listening to Christmas carols all the time, and if I wanted to go on a rant, I'd rant about Sleigh Ride, which is a good song, but everybody has a version of it. And that's the song, like every third song in the rotation is just another sleigh ride, and I can't take hearing, dun, dun, dun. Anyway, no, I can't take hearing it anymore. Every time I hear it, it just triggers me. But I do really enjoy Christmas carols on the radio because every once in a while they'll play a sacred carol. And it's really nice to hear the gospel on the radio. I mean, most of it is just Christmas pop now, and it's like Christmas love songs and stuff. But you listen to that stuff anyways. And then every once in a while I get, broadcast to the world, broadcast to people who don't usually hear the good news, a Christmas carol, which I really, really love. And so what we're going to do this year is we're going to be doing a series called Singing Christmas, and we're going to be unpacking some of these sacred carols that we've received from the past and trying to dive in and understand what are they actually speaking about, what are they actually getting at, because there's some really rich and deep things. So the carol is going to be our framework for our studies over the next few weeks. And this first week is the first song we sang, O Come Emmanuel. Now, this is probably the oldest Christmas carol we have. The text of it was written in around 800 AD. It's a very old text. The tune is newer. But it's really old. It was originally Latin, and then it was translated into English. And it's not even technically a Christmas carol. I mean, it is. But if you wanted to be more accurate, it would actually probably be an Advent carol. Because it's not speaking about Jesus coming, per se. It's more speaking about the anticipation of his coming. And that's what the season of Advent is all about. I saw this meme on the internet this week, and I just thought it was funny. And it's a good reminder that he is still coming back, and we can sing, O Come Emmanuel, looking forward and saying, yes, please come back. But the truth is, like, we sing this song knowing that Emmanuel has already come. That's the point of celebrating Christmas. So we sing the song, O come Emmanuel, out of a desire to see him come when we know that he has come already. And that's important for us to understand and to grapple with as we sing this song. As we're praying through the song, it's important for us to understand that, yes, he has already come. That's why we celebrate. But it's also important for us to understand that the mentality of the people who were anticipating his coming, the people of Israel. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's this idea of Advent. Advent is a season in the liturgical calendar which prepares us and teaches us to anticipate, as if he hadn't come, so that we appreciate the joy when we actually celebrate his arrival on Christmas. And we light candles and we sing, O Come Emmanuel, and we prepare our hearts because there was a time before Jesus came. There was a BC before the year of our Lord. Before Christ, the world was different. Before Christ, the people of Israel, their relationship to God was different. And we need to understand how it was different so we understand how Jesus changes everything. So let's look at this first verse. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Now, the most obvious connection with this verse is probably found in Isaiah 7:14. It says, Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. And the word Emmanuel literally means God with us. And if you've been with me for the last 2 years, you'll have heard that a million times. Emmanuel literally means God is with us. And so we obviously see the connection to the first verse. O come, Emmanuel, God with us. And God with us comes in the moment that the Son of God, Jesus, appears. And Jesus is coming. But then we talk about all this stuff about exile. And what's the deal with that? And to understand that, we actually have to look at where this prophecy was initially made. This is King Ahaz, and he was a king of Judah, which is the southern kingdom of Israel. And at the time, things were not good for Ahaz. Things were not good. The two kings north of him, the king of Israel and the king of Syria, are coming to attack him, to destroy his kingdom, to take over and to install another king. And he's worried. Right? There are real consequences. And Isaiah makes this prophecy to Ahaz to say, those two kings that you're terrified of, there's a child that's going to be born. And when that child is born, it's going to be a sign that God is with us. And before he gets to be old enough where he can choose good and evil, where he knows the difference between right and wrong, those two kings are not going to be a problem anymore. And you'll be delivered. That's the original context of the prophecy. Now we read that prophecy, and the church from the beginning has read that prophecy. Even Matthew, the writer of the gospel, references this prophecy and applies it to Jesus. And on one level, it does look forward to Christ, to say he is the true fulfillment of God with us because he is God in flesh. But for Ahaz, the meaning of the prophecy was more, we won't get attacked, we won't get taken over, we will not be defeated. And God brought that about. But the way God brought that about was by bringing the king of Assyria, the king of an empire, to come and completely destroy the kingdom of Syria and the kingdom of Israel. And the people who lived in the kingdom of Israel were taken and they were sent away to other lands and they were put into exile. This is what it says in Isaiah. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since that day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria is the tool God uses and sends the people into exile. And this happens. This happens in 732, I think, BC, around then. And the people of Israel go into exile. So when we sing, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, we're not just singing about a spiritual condition that we experience where we are exiles and we are slaves. We're also singing about a physical exile where the people are sent away and they're longing to return. And for 2,000 years, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, were scattered everywhere, longing to return to the Holy Land. And then, miraculously, many of them are back living in the place that they call home. The exile is not complete, though, because about 130 years later, the prophet Ezekiel is exiled to Babylon. Now, he's from the southern kingdom. He gets exiled to Babylon. Another empire is raised up because Judah is sinful. And another group of exiles go out. And this is what he says. He says, then the cherub, he sees this vision. So I have to explain this. So Ezekiel sees this vision of God. And if you want to read the vision, read Ezekiel chapter 2, and you'll go, this is the most confusing, crazy thing I've ever read. It's very odd. But he sees God, and he sees angels, and he sees these wheels around God, and he has this out-of-body experience. And in Ezekiel chapter 11, God takes him in the Spirit to the city of Jerusalem, which is not destroyed yet. So he's already been taken out of his home, but the city still remains, the king still remains, the people still remain in the city. And God shows him this vision, and this is really important. Most people don't know about this first, but this is such an important thing to understand in the history of Israel. He sees all this stuff. God says some things, and then he says, then the cherubim, the angels, lifted up their wings with the wheels beside them, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was over them. So God is over them, and the angels are under them. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city, from the temple and from the midst of the city, and stood on the mountain that is on the east side of the city. And you say, okay, that's weird. Why is that important? Why is this verse so important? And this verse is so important. What Ezekiel sees is that God's presence, which was with the people, actually gets up and leaves. It goes out of the city. It goes up on the mountain. Now, it's not gone from watching. God is not gone from his concern for the people. But because of their stubbornness and their sinfulness, because they refuse to listen to him, because they refuse to obey him, Ezekiel sees this up and out. And he leaves. When we sing songs like Create in Me a Clean Heart, O God, which is based on Psalm 51. And David writes, take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Don't take your spirit from me. This is the kind of thing that he's referencing, where God's presence, when there's sin in the Old Testament, up and actually leaves the people. And this is a sign to Ezekiel and to the people who are living in exile that God is not actually going to save Jerusalem from the trouble that they're in. And the rest of the city, or a lot of the rest of the city, gets exiled to Babylon in the coming years. And so now it's not just the north kingdom in exile, it's also the southern kingdom in exile. The whole nation is living in exile, and the temple is destroyed, and the city walls are torn down, and there's mourning. And if you want to read about the mourning, just read the book of Lamentations. Lamentations is a poem about how miserable everything is when God's presence leaves and the city and the temple are destroyed. And this is significant because it was God's presence from the time of the Exodus was always with the people. They built him a tent at first so he could live in their midst. And that was the promise of God in making them a nation. He says, I will make you a nation and I will live in your midst. And then because of their continual sin, generation after generation, he actually leaves, and all that's left are ruins. We want the temple. We want the place where God is. That's what the people said they wanted. And God said, you don't listen to me, so I'm actually leaving. 70 years later, some of the exiles come back, and they rebuild the temple. And that story is in the book of Ezra. And I know I'm jumping around here a lot, but this is important. When they build the second temple, they finish, it says, many of the priests and Levites of heads of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, they wept when they saw the second one completed with a loud voice, when they saw the foundations of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. When the temple is finished, right, or at least when the foundations are laid, the people who remember the glory of the first temple, and they would have been kids at the time of their exile, they come back home. And there's joy there, but it's mixed with sorrow. And part of the reason is because the second temple was not as great and glorious as the first. But I think the bigger reason was because the presence of God was not there in the same way. because the presence of God was in the temple and up and lifted and departed. And so you come to the second temple and you recreate it in some sense. You try to create the outer shell, but the thing that is the most important is missing. The thing at the heart of it, the thing in the Holy of Holies, the presence of God, is not there yet. And this joy and sorrow continued with the Israelites for generations. As they returned to the place where they were, the land of Israel, as they came back, there was this sense that we are still in spiritual exile because the presence of God has not come back to us, because we don't have the temple to worship in. And this is one of the reasons why Orthodox Jews are adamant in rebuilding the temple, because their exile will only end when the presence of God returns. And so while they're thrilled to be back in the land, there's sorrow mixed in with that joy, because it's not the same as it used to be. And if we're honest, we understand that feeling of sorrow and joy mixed. Now, not in the sense of God being with us or not with us, but in the sense of, as much as God is with us, we still walk through trouble, we still walk through torment, we still walk through difficulty. And in some sense, we still walk in exile. Our home is not this place. We have another home. Our home is not this place. And we're waiting to go home. We're waiting to be freed from the land of exile, from wandering in the wilderness. And so while there's joy that God is with us, Emmanuel has come, we still walk with the sorrow of this place that's built into the foundations of this universe. And we trust that God is going to restore that. But we walk with joy and sorrow. And that's why we sing the second verse. "O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent," or your coming here. "Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight." We look forward to the coming of the one who is the dayspring, the one who is light and who is the source of all light. 1 John talks about this. "This is the message we have heard from him and proclaim to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all." He is the one who set the sun to shine in the sky and the moon to glow at night. The stars shine by his command, and the light itself, which predates them all. And I find that amazing. That light itself predates the sun, predates the stars. He was the one who spoke it into being. He is the dayspring, the source of light. And we ask him to come so that the things that cause us sorrow, the shadows that cause us sorrow, would depart. That's why we sing, "O come, thou wisdom from on high, and order all things far and near. To us the path of knowledge show, and teach us in her ways to go." The "her ways" is actually a reference to Proverbs 8. And if you read the whole chapter, Proverbs is described as a woman walking through the streets, and I'll just read the first two verses. "Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand." And Proverbs 8 is a call to us to heed wisdom. But wisdom is not some disembodied thing. Wisdom is actually found in the person of Jesus. Wisdom is actually found in the person of Jesus. And because of him, Jesus, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Jesus comes as the embodiment of wisdom. It's not just God's presence with us, it's his wisdom to say, this is the mistake you're making. Please stop making this mistake. This is the way you should live. This is the way you should order your life. This is the way you are called to love each other, to love your enemy. Jesus hanging on the cross saying, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing," is not just showing us the mercy of God. It's also showing us God's wisdom so that we might walk in that way. And that sounds crazy. How can we do that? How can I love my enemies that much to forgive them as they're killing me, as they're coming after me? But that's God's wisdom, so that we might walk in his way. God's wisdom is not, it doesn't make sense, but it is. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. The obvious way, the thing that looks like wisdom, is the wide gate. The narrow gate is the thing that, against all odds and against all perception, is the thing that is actually wisdom. We sing, O come, desire of nations, bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and quarrels cease, and be thyself our King of peace. And again, this connects to the wisdom. How are we to live? Bind all peoples from all nations in one heart and mind, in unity, so that there is no more envy or strife or division or quarrels. And the amazing thing is, this is the promise of God. Because as the presence of God is lifting up and leaving the city, the thing he says directly before it is this: therefore say, thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered. And I will give you the land of Israel. And when they come there, they will remove from it all its detestable things and all its abominations. And I will give them one heart, and a new spirit I will put within them. I will remove the heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my rules and obey them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. And then he leaves. This is the weird thing. This is the dichotomy. God gives them this amazing promise, and then he's like, okay, I'm out. Because in the moment, it's judgment. The moment requires God's judgment, and God knows this. And so he removes. But in his leaving, he says, but I will redeem, I will return, and I will give you the thing that you need, the one heart that you will share, the heart of flesh instead of the heart of stone. Bid envy, strife, and quarrels cease. So he promises this promise to the people as he's leaving. It's a promise to restore. And we experience some of that promise now. The Spirit of God living in us is part of that promise to restore, to redeem, to reconcile, to transform the heart of stone that lives in our chest and have a heart that beats and feels. And that's a process that he's working on. But we hang on to the rest of the promise to restore because there's a lot of sickness and darkness and just blackness in this world. And we are waiting for the restoration of God so that where he will restore all of creation. "20 years after Ezekiel sees this vision of the Lord up and leaving, he gets another vision, and he sees the same thing. He sees the glory of the Lord, which he describes as the Son of Man, and then these crazy angels that have like 4 heads, and then these wheels with eyes in them. It's very odd. But he sees another of these visions. And he sees the restored city of Jerusalem. Now at this time, 20 years later, the city of Jerusalem is destroyed. It's in ruins. But Ezekiel sees the city restored. And he describes the city. And then he says this: as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing east, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, which is the center of the temple where the presence is. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Again, it's like, okay, whatever. But no, at the beginning of his career, like 6 years into his career, he sees the presence of God leave, and he knows hard times are ahead. He knows trouble is ahead. And even though that's associated with a promise to restore, it's not good news. The promise to restore is good news, but the promise for right now, or the consequences for right now, are bad. 20 years later, when everything is destroyed, he sees this vision of God coming back to dwell with the people. And that's the longing that the people of God before Christ had. Oh, come and be God with us again. Come and be in our midst. Come and be in our presence. because we need your presence. The temple is great. They rebuilt the temple. It's not the same without the presence of God. The presence of God was with them in the Exodus in the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. The presence of God is what led them. The presence of God is what they looked to when they needed something. And the truth is, for us, is that Jesus is that presence. He is Emmanuel. He is God with us. And we sing that a lot at Christmas time. I think every single song we sang this morning, or we'll sing, and the next one we'll sing, references this. Jesus is our Emmanuel. Jesus is God with us. And it's not just a nice word, because we need his presence. God's presence is everything. Him being with us is everything. The presence of his Spirit in our lives, the presence of his word in our mind, the presence of his words and his heart on our tongues. We need his presence. When Bree sent Robin that message, she woke up filled with joy and there was no more pain. I was like, that's the presence of God. It's the presence of God. And it's the presence of God that needs to drive everything. So in my life, I can try and follow the rules as best I can, but if the presence of God is not at the center of it, driving it forward, it's going to fall apart. Because it has to be driven by the presence of God. In this church, whatever comes, we can do all these programs and we can sing all these songs and we can create something, whatever building we're in or whatever. But if the presence of God is not at the heart of it, if God is not present, then everything we try is not going to matter, because it's God's presence that we need the most. And it's God's presence that gives the temple its specialness. And it's God's presence that makes Jesus so significant, because it's not just God's presence in Jesus, it's that Jesus is himself God in our midst. And that's why we need Jesus. Now, in coming to us, he declares, I will be with you forever. And in giving us his Spirit, he gives it to us in a new way where we do not have to worry about him taking his presence away. And I think that's something important that we need to understand. In the Old Testament, when God gave his Spirit, he could remove it. The promise of Jesus is that once you receive the Spirit, you will never lose it. You can quench it, you can ignore it, but he is going to live within you for all time. I'm with you even until the end of the age, by his Spirit within us. And so, as we sing, O come, Emmanuel, we don't sing as if, okay, God, please come back to me, because he's with us already. But we do sing it because we recognize just how much we need him with us, and how much his presence with us will drive everything that we do. It's his presence that leads us to mobilize and leads us to multiply, and nothing else. Again, we can have all the best programs, and we can have the best worship, and we can have the best preaching, and we could have the best strategy in terms of reaching people, and we can have the best arguments, but if God's presence is not in these things, they won't happen. So we sing, O come, Emmanuel, to say, God, we need your presence in these things. When I go to my neighbor, may your presence be in me so I might be a bit of your presence to them. God, when I go and share your word, may your presence be the thing that draws them in. And that's one of the things that I've been praying. Not that God would just heal or restore a situation, but that it would be his presence that does it. Whether it's to sustain somebody through a difficult time or to meet their need, to be their provision. God, may your presence be the thing that does it. Because God works by his presence, and he works through us. And again, like we need his presence. That's the make. Once we receive his presence. And then he works in us, but he also works through us so that we might be the body, the hands and feet of Jesus to the world. And in one sense, not the only sense, but in one sense, we are God's presence on earth as his church because we are his body. Now, we are not Jesus. Don't take this too far. But God uses us. God can and has, and still will, sometimes just reach into somebody's life through a dream or through an experience and be like, okay, you're following me now. And you hear these stories sometimes in Muslim majority countries where there's no Christians or the person doesn't know a Christian. They have a dream and Jesus is like, hi, I'm Jesus. And they're like, what do I do with this? And they go and find a Christian and they're like, what's happened? Who is Jesus? Please teach me. I need to know him. God does that sometimes. But even in those instances, God works through the church because that person gets connected to a Christian, gets connected to the church. And more often, God will work through another Christian to bring somebody to know him. And the reason for that is because he wants that person to become a part of the body so that they might be used and worked through and be drawn into community so that we can love each other the way he calls us to. And we need to wrestle with that. Like, God, I need your presence for myself, but how can I also be a manifestation of your presence to the person who needs it? And God, may your Spirit work through that process to draw that person in. So seek his presence. Seek his presence in his Spirit that lives within you. Seek his presence as you read his word, because it says in John, he is the Logos, he is the Word, and you will find his presence in his word. Seek his presence as you pray to him. Seek his presence in the community of believers, because he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. And remember that it's his presence that is going to drive everything and restore everything. And if you need restoration, if you need healing, if you need your mind changed on something and you recognize it, but you can't do it yourself, just ask for his presence to come in. And he will either give you what you need, and if you need it, he will give it to you, or he will give you peace to bear with whatever you're walking through. I didn't plan on saying this, but Paul, when he's dealing with the thorn in the flesh, he goes to God. He's like, God, take this away. And he goes 3 times. And the word he gets from God is, my grace is sufficient for you. I don't think Paul would have been happy with that answer if it was not God who was telling him. If I said it, he'd be like, no, I'm not taking that. I'm not taking that. But God's presence comes and we go, okay, I can understand. Maybe even I don't understand, but I can bear with this. I am at peace with this because I trust his justice. I trust his judgment. I trust that his grace is enough for me. And whatever I'm struggling with, I can walk through it knowing that he is good and he is with me, because he is. He is with me. He is with us. And as he is with us together, I pray that we would see his presence more. And to be honest, that's the thing that I've been the most excited about over the last month. We've seen God's presence. We've seen God move. And let's continue to seek that. O come, Emmanuel.